Are we in a silent depression? Ted is here to discuss it. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Ted, welcome back. This is episode number 479. 479 of the Debt Free in 30 podcast, and it's our first episode of November 2023, which of course means we are now in Financial Literacy Month.
Excellent. What's the topic today?
And what? Yeah, exactly. And what do I think of Financial Literacy Month? Not much.
Yeah.
Not much. I don't really see the point in the federal government sponsoring it, but whatever. So on the internet and on Reddit and TikTok,
right.
You know what that is?
Sure
you do. There have been a bunch of people saying that we are in a silent depression. Okay, interesting.
Okay.
Never heard that term before.
Right.
So did some poking around. We're going to talk about that today. Yeah. So my first question for you, what is the definition of a economic depression?
All right. So it's a prolonged downturn in economic activity.
Pretty simple. And so I went and did some Googling, and that's what it tells me. A depression is a severe and prolonged downturn in economic activity. That's what you just said. A depression can be defined as a recession that lasts longer than 3 years and that results in a decline of at least 10% in annual GDP. So a depression is a lot worse than a recession.
Right.
We have lots of recessions.
We almost never talk about depressions because they just don't last long.
Right. Well, and the last one, I guess, was like the Great Depression.
Oh, okay.
A depression is a dramatic and sustained downturn in economic activity with symptoms including a sharp fall in economic growth, employment, and production. Okay, that makes sense. Massive unemployment, that would certainly qualify as a depression.
Yep.
Now, the economists, and of course, we all believe the economists and the government,
sure,
because they're never wrong, tell us that no, we're not in a recession, and certainly not in a depression, because of course,
can't
growth
be in a
is still
depression
good.
if you're not
exactly.
in a recession.
Cannot be in, everything's great. So I'm going to put up the chart for those watching on YouTube of the unemployment rate in Ontario.
And this is not adjusted in any way because of COVID?
Nope. You can see there's a massive spike when you look at 2020.
Right.
The unemployment rate in May of 2020 in Ontario hit 14%, which is the highest it's been in like decades and easily 50 years.
Right.
Today it's around 6%. So based on that, that's below, historical averages. So things look pretty good, right?
Okay.
It's all good.
Assuming people are still in the workforce.
Exactly, which at the moment they are.
Okay.
And I don't have a chart for this, but I looked at the labor force participation rate and it's also going up.
So that's the one that's important.
Yeah, so everything looks great. Everything's wonderful.
Okay.
So back to the question then. Are we in a silent depression? So if everything is good, we're not in a recession, we can't be in a depression, but then what people are saying is we're in a silent depression.
I wonder why they pick silent instead of pseudo.
Well,
or quasi.
I guess there's many different ways to look at it. Right. So, why are people saying that? Well, one, and again, I don't have a chart on this because I haven't been able to get it directly from the source. But if you look at the per capita GDP, it's been essentially flat in Canada for the last 10, 12 years.
Right.
So if things are getting better and we're in this boom, should I not be doing better? Well, per capita GDP would say otherwise.
Okay.
But there's another big factor, and that is, of course, in the title of this show. It's a 4-letter word called debt. It could be argued, I'm sure you would probably argue, that, well, one of the reasons things look so good is that we're just borrowing.
Right. People are spending money they don't have.
So what's happening with credit cards? Are they going up or are they going down?
Well, as we predicted last year when we were still in the what do you want to call it? In the COVID.
The post period.
Right. We told everyone that the credit card debt was going to exceed pre-COVID levels by Christmas of this year. And I believe that's come true.
Yes, absolutely. And again, we'll put up the chart, and this is Canadian household credit card debt.
Right.
So it's everybody. And you can see that, from 2013 to 2019, up. And then the lockdowns happened, boom, massive deleveraging. I can't spend anything, can't go on vacation. People paid down their credit cards. But it was sometime actually last year in 2022 when the total balances owing got above the previous levels. So your prediction was correct.
That's when all the government subsidizing stopped, right?
Right. And of course, the other thing that happened was inflation.
Right.
So less income coming in, more expenses. What do? I put it on my credit cards. So we are now pretty much at $100 billion.
Okay.
Never been at that level before. And what's even worse, if you do the math on this chart here, is credit card debt is up around 13% over the last year.
Yeah, I can believe that.
That's a pretty big number.
You want to know? Well, we'll do that in our year-end show. You want to know what's going to be up next year?
Yes, well, it ain't going down.
That's right.
And I'll throw another chart up here that shows the correlation between the insolvency rate in Ontario and credit card debts. Well, guess what? It's a pretty good correlation.
Right. Credit
card debt goes up, the insolvency rate goes up. So I think this feeling that we're in a silent depression is more pronounced amongst young people. Sure. And that may be because they're more likely to be on TikTok and seeing all this stuff. But
well, they're more likely leveraged with credit cards and challenged as well. They don't have any assets to fall back on. So if the economy is good because real estate's going up and your portfolio's getting better, it doesn't affect them.
Because they don't have the assets and they're not saving
right.
it. And then, of course, they're also disproportionately whacked by inflation.
Correct.
Expenses. So again, we can throw up some more charts on the screen here, but it's easy to describe them. The CPI, and we can debate whether that's actually a legit measure or not, but we're not going to get into that now. Leave your comments below on the thing there. CPI peaked at 8.1% in June of 2022, which kind of makes sense because it collapsed during the 2020 and just grew. And it's come back down. It's now under 4%, but that's still a lot higher than it was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago.
Right.
And if you split it up and just look at food inflation,
right,
the CPI for food was over 10% during the period September 22 through January of this year. It peaked in January 2023 at 10.4%. That's a pretty big number.
Yeah, and I'd have to look at the basket because I'm the one who does the shopping in our house, and it feels like more to me.
Yeah, it depends what you buy.
That's right.
So now, of course, the way they do the basket is they assume, oh, well, prices are up. You're not buying ribeye, you're buying hamburger. And so they do a substitution. So I would agree there are certainly some costs up a lot more than that. Now, if you look at the numbers today, it's around 6%. Okay. So it's come down, but obviously a big number. The other thing everyone spends money on, shelter.
Gotta live somewhere.
It peaked at 7.4% in April and May of 2022. It's now running at around 6%. So that's also a big number.
Well, and rent increases are regulated, right? So that's a really big number.
Well, they are regulated if you stay in the same rent-regulated place, but once you move...
Yeah, they can do whatever they want.
They can do whatever they want.
So who the hell would move?
That's right, which is why you don't move unless you have to. But, of course, if the landlord says, oh, I'm selling the condo or I'm moving my mother in, then out you go and... I mean, it's not legal, but whatever, it obviously happens. So the point is that even though headline inflation is only 4%, the two things that everybody spends money on, food and shelter, are running a lot higher than that.
Right.
But maybe wages are up higher than that. No.
No.
Again, the data I was able to pull, it looks like wage growth, all employees, all ages, is running more like 3% year over year.
Which is half of inflation.
Which is what half of inflation is.
Okay.
And part of that is because, companies are hiring gig workers, contract temp workers, saving money. And if you're a college graduate and you're deep in debt, what are you going to do? Take what you can get.
Right.
So I think it's all of those things that are combining into this. Now, last week on the podcast, as you know, because you watched it, we had Ron Butler on. We did a live broadcast. And we put up on the screen, and I'll put it up again, this chart, which showed what is the average price of a house in the GTA in 2020 and then now.
Yep.
And then what does it cost you to actually get that house, assuming 20% down payment, 5-year fixed rate mortgage, 25-year amortization.
Right.
And the average price of a house has gone from, $900,000 to $1.1 million, but the monthly payment on that mortgage has gone from $3,200 to $5,400.
Wow.
And even worse, the amount of income required to get that house. Yep. Now, on the chart I'm putting up on the screen, it shows it's gone from $90,000 to $150,000. But in fact, as Ron pointed out last week, no, it's way higher than that because I'm not factoring in the stress test.
Right.
You have to qualify at 2% higher. So now it's more like $190,000 is what you need to qualify to buy the average house. So my question for you, Ted, do you think that would cause somebody some angst?
Just a little bit of stress, unless you're a government employee that's about to go on strike because you want to get the base 90.
And I mean, $190,000, that means if there are two of you, you've got to, but you got to both be earning $100,000 each.
So you've each got to be making $50 an hour.
Yeah. And okay, there's not a massive number of jobs at $100,000 a year.
Right.
So I think this whole silent depression thing is, I mean, it's obviously real.
Yep.
Because again, you think back to when you were a kid, and I know it's not easy because we're old men now, but when we went to school, I mean, I went to university in the 80s, and I tell it the same story on every other show. It cost next to nothing to go. I didn't graduate with student loan debt. There were lots of jobs when I got out.
Yep.
And so I had a pretty reasonable expectation that I'd get a job, I'll be able to buy a car, not a great car, but you know, buy a house, get married, have kids, it would all be great.
Yep.
And if you're 20 years old now, do you have that same expectation?
Yeah, your expectation is you're going to graduate with between $30,000 and $50,000 worth of student debt. You're going to you'll be underemployed for the first little while, and so your life's on hold until you catch all those things up.
And it's very common for it to take more than 10 years to pay off your student loan debt.
Right.
So, okay, I'm starting my life at the age of 30 or 35.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I think, you know, people end up losing hope. And I mentioned this on the show last week. I want to get your comments on whether I'm totally off base on this. Because I said, when you lose hope, there's three things that can happen. The first one is you go, you know what, life goes on. I'm just going to roll with the punches.
Right.
And I certainly know people like that. It doesn't matter how many times they get whacked in the head. They just keep on going.
Yep.
That's pretty rare. The second option is you say, you know what, I'm just giving up. Forget it. I'm not going to bother working extra hard. I'm just going to get a minimum wage job because I'm never going to, I don't need to save any money. I don't care. And the third alternative is to say, you know what? No, I do want to eventually buy a house. I'm going to roll the dice. And that's where the risky behavior comes in.
Right.
So, okay, instead of putting my $100 a week that I'm able to save into a GIC, I'm going to put it in that meme stock. Or I'm going to buy crypto because crypto might quadruple in value and maybe I can do that. Long term, that's probably not a great solution.
Correct.
You're going to get yourself into some trouble.
Well, and you know what you don't touch on? There's probably a fourth option, that there's a paradigm shift. So people aren't going to plan on saving to buy a house. Okay, I don't need a car anymore. So they change the way they're spending on capital goods and even on their, I guess, individual expenses, right? You change the way you're going to live, and that's going to have a ripple effect throughout the entire economy. We're built on a system of just-in-time inventories. We build it, we sell it, we build the next one. When people stop buying it, I mean, the silent depression is going to become a real depression.
Everything clogs up.
Right.
And isn't whether I'm going to buy something is based on my expectation for the future.
Yes.
It's entirely based on that. So when I was, growing up, I had this belief, whether it was true or not. Doesn't matter if your beliefs are true or not.
Right.
It's just,
we're not talking about
that's
that.
Not, do you believe it? I believed that I was in control of my own destiny.
Mm-hmm.
If I work hard, then I'll become the partner in the accounting firm. Now, it never happened. Not yet anyways, but it never happened. So, but as a result of that belief, I moved forward and, we ended up starting Hoyes and Michalos, and here we are 25 years later with our own podcast. If you don't have that belief that things will get better, then...
Well, for most people, that means there's no motivation to try. So if you don't think things are going to get better, then why the hell should I put any effort into anything at all?
Now, are you seeing that? You talk to people every single day. Do you talk to people who give you the impression that, you know what, I've just given up, or I'm going to be risky, or what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so what's interesting, during the pandemic, the only people we saw were the folks that were self-disciplined. They recognized they had a problem and they wanted to correct it. So volume dropped by 50% because there was nobody pushing the other half. Now we're seeing the people that are being pushed into insolvency because they're folks either aggressively trying to collect on their debts or they're squeezing them and they just can't get squeezed anymore. So anyone that comes to see us there's some element of, I've had enough, I got to find a better way to do this.
And we're seeing the squeezing coming from all angles.
It is, because as we identified earlier, so housing inflation is 6%, food inflation is 6%. Fuel is probably actually, we didn't show that chart, but it's still up over the last couple of years.
It's very volatile, and obviously there's world events that are impacting
because it's all over the place. So it's costing you more to live. You're incurring more debt to do that. It's costing more to service the debt because the interest rates are up. It's just it's a perfect storm for anyone that's not economically secure.
Well, and one of the big risk factors now is Canada Revenue Agency.
Yeah, right.
Because for a couple of years there, they really weren't doing much in the way of collecting.
Sure, they were basically on hiatus because the world was in a bad place.
And now all of a sudden it's like, no, it's full steam ahead. Here we go. And I've had 2 instances in the last week of people who were elderly. Like these are people who are, 70 years old or up. They aren't working. They don't have any employment income. They've got pensions. They owed money to CRA like 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Right.
And it's like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to open a new bank account somewhere else and not worry about it. Well, CRA has found them at their new bank.
Right.
And is now garnishing, freezing bank accounts, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
We never saw that before. But now, boom, it's...
Because they got to catch up on 2 years of doing nothing.
Yep. And that's exactly what they're doing. So, okay, so this is kind of depressing.
In the other way, you mean depressing.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's right.
It's a different type of depression.
And that's why I specified this, the silent economic depression, because we're not talking about the other kind, although they're very closely related.
Because we're not qualified.
We are definitely not qualified. So I think we both agree, though, that for a certain segment of the population, it's really tough out there.
Yes, at least a third of the population. I mean, a third of Canadians own their own home. They're in great shape. A third of Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck. A third of Canadians are underwater. And so all of these things that are happening right now are dramatically affecting that bottom third of Canadians.
Right. And that often breaks down age-wise.
It sure does.
Because if you're 60 years old or up, then, well, you were able to buy a house 30 years ago, you're fine.
Probably.
Not everybody.
Yeah, you can't actually access your equity unless you sell your house or finance it somehow. So
right. But if I did buy a house 30 years ago and if it's paid off, then, yes. Oh, well, I don't care that interest rates are going up because it just means my savings are going up more.
That's right.
I can now put money in a bank account and get 5%.
Yep.
So that group of people are doing great. They're not in a silent depression. Yep. And in fact, they're watching us going, you guys don't know what you're talking about because everything's great.
They're probably not watching us.
Probably not watching us anyways. So, no, we got people from all demographics.
So you got that middle cohort that is getting by. Those are the ones that are making spending changes. So they're down cutting the type of the beef or whatever it is you were talking about earlier, or they're not going to buy that new car, or they're going to put off the vacation, or whatever it is. They're going to get by, but they're going to get by pulling back from what they were going to spend because the money just isn't there.
And that's really the big chunk of the economy.
It is.
Those
and you have to be afraid of the people in the bottom cohort of that third. There's the risk that they're going to fall into the bottom third, which are the folks that are no longer living paycheck to paycheck. They're living off credit.
They can't do it.
Right.
Yeah, they absolutely can't do it. So, okay, we agree that it's definitely happening. And I certainly talk to lots of people who, every week somebody says to me, yeah, I know I'm never going to be able to buy a house.
And I tell them that that may not be as bad a thing as they think it is.
Right. But it's if you've grown up, in a house and you always thought you would have a house and you'd have a spouse and you'd have kids and you'd have a car and all that, and now you realize I can't do it.
Right.
Then that's where it becomes so disheartening, I think.
Yep.
So what I would like to do for the last 10 minutes of this broadcast is see if we can find anything positive here. Is there any practical advice we can give? So the first thing that pops into my head is, well, there are cycles, right? Real estate goes up, real estate goes down. So now that interest rates are a lot higher and the real estate market is being squeezed, is it possible that real estate prices will not keep going up 20% a year forever?
So they're not going up 20% right now, but they're also not falling. One of the predictions everybody made with these interest rate hikes was that there would be an adjustment, that the bubble would finally burst and things would reverse a couple of years at any rate. And I don't think there's no evidence that that's happened.
Well, in certain markets it has. If you're looking at the luxury home in Forest Hill in Toronto, no, they're doing fine. If you're looking at the, studio condo, 1-bedroom condo in the heart of Toronto, then yes, there certainly has been a drop, not a massive drop.
Yep.
But and those were the condos that people bought as investments.
That's right.
And okay, I buy it, I'm going to rent it out, and like even 5 years ago, if you had a rental condo, you knew that as the owner, you were going to be putting in $500 a month over and above what you're collecting in rent to cover all the expenses. But you didn't care because it was going up by $1,000 a month. I'm fine.
It's an investment.
But now you're putting in maybe $1,000, $2,000 a month.
Right.
And if you had a variable rate mortgage on that condo.
And if your tenants won't leave, you're stuck with the lower rents.
then yeah, you got, and even if the rent is going up each year, well, your mortgage payment might have doubled in the last 2 years.
Yep.
If you were on variable, there's no way it's gone up that much.
Right.
So I think what we are starting to see a little bit, and we'll see a lot more next year, is, you know what? I'm dumping that place.
Right.
I'm selling. And when we look at the Hoyes Michalos Homeowners Bankruptcy Index, it hasn't gone up much. I mean, we're sitting in the sort of 5, 6, 7% range now. It was 0, but 10, 15 years ago it was a third. So it's certainly come down. So we haven't seen it yet, but is it not possible that we do start to see real estate prices drop?
That's what I mean. That'll be the ultimate sign that we are definitely in a real depression as opposed to this silent depression.
Well, or a recession. If
a recession doesn't last long enough, the price still be an adjustment, but they won't.
Yeah, I guess you're right. We could have a real estate depression where for periods of many years things go down. Now, of course, that's counterbalanced by immigration. I guess if we keep bringing in 1.2 million people every year, then maybe that supports it.
Assuming they have money to buy.
Right. So okay, back to that person who's sitting in front of you and says, you know what, I'm never going to be able to buy a house. What do you tell them?
Okay. Well, so the lesson that we all learned years and years ago that, we seem to forget every once in a while is cash is king. You've got to be able to live on the amount of money you have coming in. And then you set your own priorities for how that money is going to be spent. Right now, you can't say, well, if somebody's in a living situation, they can't say, okay, I'm going to buy a house tomorrow, because you've got to plan it out ahead of time. You've got to adjust your spending so that you can either save the down payment or get it from family or friends or whatever. You can't just decide to do it. You can't change it overnight. And so prioritize and plan. But we've always talked about that with people too. You need to plan.
Well, and there's only 2 elements to that, income and expenses. That's what cash flow is, right?
Right. And your expenses can change overnight and your income almost never can.
Yeah, it's unlikely your pay is going to double. And again, when you and I were young men 30 years ago, it was very common to go work at a company and be there for 10 or 20 years.
Right.
Maybe for your entire career. It is much more common now, if you're 25 years old, that 2 years from now you won't be at the same company.
Right.
And in fact, the only way you can really get raises and move up the ladder is I move.
You got to switch positions. It's a new hire, so now they start you at a new plug on the ladder.
Right.
As opposed to trying to climb the damn ladder.
And it's hard to build up a lot of institutional memory in a corporation and know everybody. But hey, if I was in that position, and you and I did both work at big companies, and we did both leave.
Right.
We both worked for 2 accounting firms before we got here.
Yep.
And I believe we left the first one to go to the second one because it was a better opportunity.
That's exactly right. I mean, back when we were young men, as you keep saying, the way you got a big increase in your pay, somewhere 15, 20%, was to switch firms, switch to a higher position that they would train you into.
Yep. So. And otherwise it's like, well, you got hired at that level. We think that's what you are.
We'll keep giving you your cost of livings, and you're never going to get the same advancement as you get by switching over. Yeah.
So, I mean, I hate to say it because you and I are both employers, but you know what? I'm sticking up for myself. If I'm an employee, I'm sticking up for myself.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean I'm switching jobs every 3 months. And you got to be careful because when you switch to a new job, you are now the low person on the totem pole, as they used to say.
Yeah. So if they're going to make an adjustment to staff, it's usually the last guy in.
That's right, because we can get rid of you and not have to pay very much severance because you've only been here a year. Right. So I think you got to be careful, but I would be, if I was in that position, I would be always looking ahead to whatever the next thing is. I'd be doing my networking. I'd have my resume up to date.
I believe you'd be making a plan.
I'd be making a plan. That's exactly what I'd be doing. Okay, so that's the income side of it. And maybe I'd also have a second gig, a side gig.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, lots of people will tell you to do that, but it's hard to maintain over time.
Right. And I had that exact discussion with a 20-something-year-old yesterday, and he said, okay, you can't really work 2 jobs at the same time. Yeah, okay, it's theoretically possible now because if they're both remote jobs,
right?
Lots of guys in the IT business are working from home and doing 2 jobs at once because, okay, well, when that server's booting, I can boot this one or whatever.
Yep.
But you're right. I don't think that's long-term sustainable. But if what I'm trying to do is jumpstart it, get a few bucks in the bank so that I can start my investment plan, well, maybe doing that for 6 months or a year.
Maybe.
And I'm not saying working 80 hours a week, but okay, I pick up that side gig and do that. Yep. Okay, that's the income side of it. On the expense side of it, now you made the comment that expenses what did you say, can change quickly?
Yeah, expenses can change overnight.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, so the average person has no control over the cost of food, the cost of their rental accommodations, the cost of the interest rates. I mean, you have to pay what you have to pay for these things. You can't just decide I'm not going to eat anymore. You can't decide I'm not going to pay the rent. I'm going to go live in a box. Well, you can, but it's not something anybody would want you to do. So expenses are usually out of your control. What you can look at is, what's the best way to describe this? You can modify what it is you're purchasing. And I guess we touched on that a little bit earlier. So you decide not to buy the ribeye steak, you're getting ground beef. I don't know why we keep using that example, but
there must be a vegetarian example, but sorry, I don't know.
Eggplant parmesan.
There you go. There you go. Well, and that, which is why we're now seeing more and more people, well, I've got a roommate. I'm living in a smaller place. I haven't moved out from home yet.
Constantly seeing articles now in the various different news media saying that, a quarter or a third of all Canadian restaurants are losing money because you don't have money to go out anymore. That's all part of this. People are spending it differently because they don't have any choice.
I suspect restaurants, a certain percentage has always lost money because that's a very tough business. There are very few restaurants that have been in business for 50 years, but I get the sentiment. But yeah, and that's exactly on the expense side what people are doing. It's like, well, I guess I'm learning to cook and I'm doing it at home.
Right.
And that's what I've got to do. So do you think that when we're having this discussion 2 years from now, anything will be any different? It won't be any different tomorrow, but do you think we actually do head into an economic recession and things ease off, or are we in this for a much longer period of time?
Well, I'm convinced there's not going to be a significant change in interest rates for at least another year, maybe 18 months. And so that's kind of drives everything else because it's as more and more people renew their mortgages or they try to take out new loans for other things, the service costs on debt is going to get so much higher for everybody. And that basically, the service cost on debt eats up your ability to make current expenses. So if you've only got $2,000 coming in and you used to pay $200 towards your debts and now you got to pay $300, well, $100 had to come from somewhere. So you're not spending it on those current things that you used to spend it on.
Which brings us to the final topic, which is debt.
Right.
So you're right. If you have no debt, okay, well, at least I don't have to worry about interest rates going up or anything like that.
Well, it impacts you as well, but not to the same extent that somebody that's heavily leveraged.
Right. And so, I mean, obviously you agree with me that reducing your debt levels is kind of job number one.
Right. It's common sense. We're back to the whole cash is king. You've got to pay your bills. Well, if you reduce your debt bill, you've got more money to pay for your current living expenses. And that's really what I'm talking about.
And obviously it's easier said than done because if you've got a student loan, it's like I can't just pay it off tomorrow.
You can't reduce your expenses overnight.
Right. And if I've got a car loan and I need the car for work, I can't just, not have a car because I need it to get to work or whatever. But I think that's certainly the area you want to start focusing on. And we've talked about this many times. You want to start with the high interest ones because that's going to give the most bang for the buck. And obviously everybody knows what we do for a living. People come in to see us and it's like, okay, well, if you really do have that unmanageable amount of debt, then maybe we got to talk about a consumer proposal. We're making a deal to deal with this.
Yeah, one of the frustrating isn't the right word, but the strange anomalies in our business is by the time folks actually call us, they should have done it 6, 9, 12 months before. I mean, you got to beat down the average person to the point where they start to feel no hope. They start to feel really frustrated and insecure before they'll actually reach out for help. And that's when we see them. Often they're at their worst, at least financially.
Yeah, and that's not just a financial thing. You don't go to the doctor at the first sign of problems. You don't go to the dentist the first time.
They got a word for that, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So it's, we always wait until we can't wait any longer.
Right.
But obviously we encourage people to, reach out sooner rather than later.
You have more options when you reach out sooner.
And you can get back on track. So
right.
There you go. Ted, thank you very much. I think it's a depressing topic because it's real. People are really suffering. We see it every day. And there are no magic solutions, but I mean, I'm obviously on record as predicting that interest rates have already peaked. So we'll see if that's true or not.
I don't know if they've peaked. I'd say they're not going down.
No, and I'm certainly not predicting they're going to be back to 0% by a week from next Thursday.
Right.
So we are in this situation for a while longer. So whatever you can do to maximize your income, reduce your expenses over the next year, that's probably the way to go. So there you go. That is our show for today. an announcement. We have a web page where you can leave comments. So if you would like Ted and I to answer certain questions, you've got show ideas, whatever, you can go to hoyes.com/DFI30 comments, and you can actually leave us a voice message there. And we'll see if we can figure out how to answer it here on the show. So hoyes.com/DFI30 comments. So again, that is our show for today. We have a new episode every Saturday morning, except for last week when it was live on Monday. But we're mostly recorded. It's available on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube, or all podcasting apps. Spotify, you're a big Spotify guy, aren't you, Ted?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure I am.
Yeah, and TikTok.
And
right
TikTok, yeah, that's not a podcasting
I have 3 teenage
thing.
children. I must know what all
you
that
must
stuff
know all
is.
of that stuff, exactly. And obviously Apple Podcasts and Spotify and everywhere else. So please like and subscribe, and we will see you next week. Until next week, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoyes for Ted Michalos. That was Debt Free in 30.